Okay, Eric, let's talk about the science of masturbation. Now, I want to start by talking about this idea of semen retention, which has a long history and seems increasingly popular today. But before we dive into what the research says, let's talk about kind of where this fear of semen retention comes from.
Hmm.
So, in my textbook, The Psychology of Human Sexuality, I talk a little bit about something called DOT syndrome, spelled DHAT, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is a
Hmm.
fear of losing semen. And it's often described as this culture bound phenomenon that's relatively prominent in India and Pakistan, where semen is kind of seen as this essential fluid, and losing it is kind of like draining your life force. Now, as it turns out, this idea is not so culture bound after all, and
Hmm.
it's growing in popularity in the West. And I can't help but notice that in recent years, there's been this growing almost fetishization in the West with East Asian traditions in general when it comes to health and wellness. And that seems to include importing beliefs about semen retention.
Hmm.
So tell us a little bit about how spiritually enlightened social media influencers have brought this idea of semen retention to the masses.
Yeah, I think you really explained it really well. It is a lot of white, Western, like spiritual wellness influencers that you see on TikTok or Instagram, and they just kind of have a cherry picking of appropriation of various cultures outside of their own that kind of fit into their own wellness packages, right? And so a lot of that does come from Eastern traditions of like traditional Chinese medicine, parts of like Hinduism, and Taoism is a big one as it pertains to this. And they kind of pick out these little parts that deal with looking at semen as being kind of this vital fluid in your body, or a vital force in your body. And therefore, any expulsion of this fluid, loss of this fluid, is detrimental to your health. And so they can dismiss a lot of other health advice from Taoism, but they kind of latch on to this one. And I think they latch on to it in a very similar way that we were talking about previously, of that there's a general masturbation taboo and anxiety and insecurity about it. So, of course, anything speaking from a place of authority, especially the coveted like ancient traditions, from a white Western perspective of viewing Eastern philosophies as kind of mystical and in their own right, that, oh, this must be true, right? And I forget the logical fallacy that's called, maybe something appeal to tradition, or something that, oh,
Mhm.
it's been around for thousands of years, it must be true. So you hear that argument a lot. And so it is an appropriation of Taoism and using traditional Chinese medicine for their own kind of white Western wellness kind of grift that they have going. And yeah, you definitely see that they are incorporating the semen as a vital fluid in your body that's completely connected to your physical health, as being a strong component of whatever they're selling with their yoga classes or spiritual retreats, or whatever. And that's the funny thing in terms of like being called names on social media. That was the new one I got during the course of the researching for this book, is that somebody called me an imperialist because I was, quote, shitting on Eastern philosophies or traditions. And of course, the person who called me as an imperialist was some white guy from Seattle with tribal
Of
tattoos.
course.
So again, yeah, so you kind of understand like where this stuff is coming from. But yeah, they are definitely taking it from different philosophies and applying it for themselves. But what you were saying with the DOT syndrome, yeah, it's a cultural bound syndrome. That's how I learned it. I'm a clinical psychologist. I got the DSM over my shoulders here, and that's how it's listed in there. That's how I learned about it early on in grad school. But throughout the course of researching this book, it's not so culture bound.
Nope.
The underlying fear is a fear of semen loss. It may look different in different cultures. I think within Pakistan and India, it focuses a lot of the fear that you're urinating out semen accidentally. But the underlying fear is still that you're losing semen, and that's harmful to your body in some way. And that's what we see in Europe and in the United States currently.
Yeah, it's so many things I could say here, but we've often heard about people being, cafeteria Christians or
Right.
cafeteria whatever their religious background or tradition is, and just pulling out the bits and pieces that make sense to them. And we see a lot of people doing that with some of these East Asian cultures and traditions, just pulling out the parts that they believe in or want to support and so forth, and discarding the rest that's inconvenient to them, right? So yeah, this kind of thing happens a lot. But I think it is part of this sort of broader health and wellness trend, and part of like the all natural kind of like, if it comes from your own body, it's good for you. And so, you need to retain that or whatever. And so there's, a lot of different ways to kind of unpack what's going on here. But what does the science of semen retention actually tell us? I mean, so what are the claimed benefits of abstaining from ejaculation for prolonged periods of time? And does the science say there's any actual benefits to that?
Right. Short answer is no. The science is completely different than what the claims from the semen retentionists are making. So what they are claiming, the benefits of not ejaculating, so retaining your semen, is that by retaining, you're not losing the vital nutrients that are in seminal fluid. And so they're worried about zinc loss, they're worried about protein loss, different sugars, they're worried about a decrease in testosterone and how that can affect muscle mass and everything else. And so a side note here, we may or may not get into this during this conversation, but so much of this is packaged in male insecurity and masculine insecurity of what it means to have like an idealized masculine body. And so masturbation really challenges those ideals, or at least they can make the argument that it challenges those ideals. And one way is that masturbation supposedly causes testosterone loss and muscle mass loss. And that always got me thinking of like, do they actually think like the testosterone is sitting in your epididymis and you're ejaculating out? Like, how is the loss actually occurring? So what the science actually says behind all of this is it's like a partial truth. It's like, semen does have a lot of nutrients in it. There's proteins, there's sugars, there's minerals in it. What is misunderstood, however, is the function of those vital nutrients in semen. The function of those nutrients is to support the life of the sperm cells, not the person making the sperm cells. Mm-hmm. It's such a trivial amount. It's just to make sure that the sperm cell is healthy, alive, mobile. It can get to point A and to point B, what it needs to do, if we're talking conception. Otherwise, your body doesn't care that you have semen sitting in it. If you're not ejaculating, it's just sitting in your prostate and seminal vesicles. Your body will slowly absorb it, and your body is not gaining any benefit from the trace amounts, even from that reabsorption. And from the testosterone, I have no idea where that's coming from because that's circulating through your blood. Obviously, it's made in the testicles, but you're not ejaculating it out. They always like to point to this one study that shows 7 days of abstinence showed an increase in testosterone compared to those who were not abstinent. One thing to note here is that it didn't single out masturbation. This is any kind of abstinence. And that's the thing, too, with any kind of no-fap or semen retention claims is that masturbation is not unique here. You're actually talking about abstaining from an orgasm, any mechanism to get to an orgasm, but oftentimes they just kind of think that masturbation orgasm is the harmful one. An orgasm with your spouse on your wedding night to make a child, that's okay for your body. Your body doesn't care how it's having an orgasm. But what's interesting with that testosterone study is that it was retracted, so we can't even look at it for useful information. From some of the studies I was looking at in like fertility journals, there's a lot of debate over how long somebody should abstain from any kind of orgasm, again, just not from masturbation, to have a better increased chance or a likelihood of conceiving. And that was really just at a couple of days, like 48 hours. And really that's going to increase seminal volume. But even if you're abstaining for like 2 months with the goal of having like better fertility, that's actually not giving you better fertility. You're having greater volume of semen that's ejaculated, but the actual sperm cells themselves may not be healthier. And actually there's an argument that more frequent ejaculations are healthier for fertility because you are kind of ejaculating out the duds in the stockpile. And so their argument that it has any type of impact on testosterone or fertility is just not backed up by the data.
Yeah, it's so interesting that some people buy into this idea that ejaculate is just pure testosterone. And I mean, if you're so concerned about like not having enough testosterone in your body. I mean, shouldn't you be over at the glory hole or something? I mean, you could have this free supply of like endless pure testosterone, right?
Right,
But
right,
that's
absolutely.
not where they go for some reason.
No, I think that would challenge their views of idealized masculinity too. So I think that's more the issue.